just getting set up here. Make sure everything is functioning how it's supposed to. If you're on, let me know if you can hear me. Should be good. Is my chat box on over here? It should be. Just doing a sound check real quick. Let me know if you can hear me. Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right. So I'm going to copy and paste some questions for thought for y'all to think about, especially in terms of adding to the dialogue like we were discussing. Hold on. Let me take the bullets off because it's making it lump together. See if that works better. All right, so let's check in. How is everyone? How are we doing? How was your sort of extended weekend? Let me see. What was it? Is witness a possession or a resource? So I'm just getting all these questions in here. I wanted to give you a good starting point for the discussions. A good amount of this we've touched on already. Okay. That's all of them. So yeah, a good amount of these we've kind of started to touch on already. We looked at that video with the woman who was paying to become more Black visibly, right? And then talking about visiting Africa, and that's how she was going to learn. And then we've talked about some of the costs, but not necessarily in terms of dollars, right? We talked about the cost of what it feels like to be Black, the racism, injustices, police brutality, like all those different nuances. And we talked about a couple of different intersections, such as gender, right? And with wealth in particular, right, gender definitely starts to enter that question a little bit more than usual, because we've also identified not only a wealth and wage gap between Black folks and others, but also between female-bodied people and non-female-bodied people, right? Between men and women. So we're gonna see a lot of those intersections come back up in this dialogue too. Okay. So let's check in. How are you? How are all the things? How are we feeling? Is everyone all right post-election? Things have definitely been calmer than anticipated, and that's certainly good. Fairly calmer, right? But all in all, how are you? We're at week 12, right? We got 16 weeks in a semester. It's coming to an end. I conquered my fear of flying this weekend. Oh, wow. Great things I see coming in my future. Dope opportunities. That's amazing. What did you do to work on that fear? Did you like go skydiving or something? That's really interesting. I don't know if you can hear her in the background. I don't know what is going on over there. So just ignore the things that's happening behind me. How else are we doing? How are we? How are all the things? We haven't talked in a little bit over a week, right? I flew from Spokane, Washington to San Jose. Oh, like in a plane. Oh. Oh, that's cool. Well, congratulations. I'm glad that you were able to work on that fear. That's amazing. That'll open you up to so many opportunities, you know, to see new places and just experience more life. So that's great. Glad to hear that. Y'all are always so quiet. Oh, there's only 2 of you on right now too. Okay. I know it's strange, right? Because it's a different day than we're usually doing lectures. So, okay. Anything going on in the world around us that we need to talk about? Anything happening out there? I know we're all still kind of settling in with election things. There's still more to go. Matter of fact, let's talk about that for a second. So, what does the process look like from here on out? So, the election is not done, right? It is not done. It's important for us to understand that, because what people don't understand about the Electoral College is that we're literally voting for other people to vote again, right? So, the electorates are people. Those are people who are going to vote again. And so that vote happens December the 14th. Now, most of the time, right? So when you're awarded electorates, you're basically getting awarded people who you believe are like on that same side as the constituency. And so there's not a lot of movement that happens in the Electoral College. Most of the time, like you don't see a shift, but it is absolutely possible to see one, right? Because they are more than welcome to vote against what their constituency has asked for. So us voting for electorates is literally us voting for an ask for a vote, right? Election wise, I feel like I can finally breathe more. I heard there's going to be a Proud Boys rally and a bunch of them, other than people doing nationwide marches. Yeah, so there's a lot of different rallies that we're going to see. There's a lot of different protests that we're going to see, and all of those are obviously legal, right? But there are some real world consequences that can come out of it. And so one of those things is, well, what happens if Trump just decides that he wins, right? Well, there are legal loopholes for this. I was actually watching a video that Van Jones had put out yesterday. And if you haven't seen it, it's probably something interesting to look at for those who are interested in like legal loopholes and things like that. And so there are clauses within the Constitution that would allow for Trump to remain in office. And so us being aware of those clauses is going to become vitally important in the way that the next couple of months pans out. Also the lawsuits, right? There's a lot of lawsuits that's going on. If I can find it, I should have saved it yesterday and I didn't. If I can find it, I'll save it for you. But if you just kind of look him up, right, Van Jones, you should be able to find it. He's kind of like plain clothed in the video, so he's not like being news anchor Van Jones at the time. I'll see if I can find it. Anyway, so our engagement from here on out is going to matter heavily in keeping accountability, right? Part of the democratic process is a peaceful transition of power, right? Well, if the person who is in power is not agreeable to a peaceful transfer, well, what needs to occur, right? Well, we still need a peaceful transfer in some way, shape, or form. And so that could look like a different form of concession. So, take some time from this point, right, for the next month or so to really start to look into the election process, right? All those little nuances that we don't necessarily know or don't talk about, those are going to become really important for us over the next 2 months. Okay. Yeah, if I can find it, I definitely will. Anything else happening in the world around us? I think we're all kind of just overwhelmed with election stuff right now. COVID, right? All those half stories that we're getting told on the news. All right, so let's talk about wealth. We're going to talk about wealth, we're going to talk about wage, and we're going to talk about what a statistical valuation of a life looks like. Okay, so what is wealth? When you think about wealth, what are some ideas that come to mind? Right, these are some more terms that are basic but could still use a little bit of teasing out, right? The same way that we've done with gender and race. So we're going to add some terms to that. So far, all Trump's attempts have failed. Yeah, all the usual attempts. I'm talking about unusual attempts. Those are the things we need to watch out for. Yeah, just waiting to see what's going to happen. Okay, class and income, right? So class and income deal with two different things, right? So they're dealing with literal money, right? But it's also dealing with possessions, right? So an amount and type of possessions. So think about like cars, for example. You can tell when someone has more money by the type of car that they drive, right? And so that amount of money is also going to bleed into a type of possession as well as the amount of them. So you go to somebody's house who has one car, right? Versus somebody's house who has 5 foreign cars, right? Maybe that first house has like a Honda Accord or something, right? Well, you're already making a wealth assumption based off of that differentiation, right? Okay. So there's an abundance issue, first and foremost. Okay, what else? Let's think about a state of richness, right? So if you think about being rich in the same way that you think about blackness, for example, this can have both a material meaning as well as a what is the word I'm looking for? Symbolic, right? A symbolic meaning. So you can have a material meaning, and you can have a symbolic meaning, right? And so it's a state of mind, right? How many times do we hear people say, "Oh, I'm rich because of the full life that I live with people that I love, and it's not about money," right? Well, that's a mindset, right? In the same way that waking up, hustling, wanting to be a millionaire, like all those things are also mindsets, right? And so they're both going to go into your state of richness, right? And so it's going to inform your life differently depending on how you interact with this state of mind. Okay? There's an idea of being plentiful versus being needy, right? And you can kind of think of this like gender on a spectrum, right? And so if you think about this spectrum of how much you have versus how much you need, right? Each person, each household, right? Each need by itself is going to weigh somewhere on this spectrum, right? Well, this also feeds into your personal wealth or your communal wealth, your family wealth, right? How much does your family have versus how much do you need? And so you've probably heard of this as the haves and the have-nots. Okay. Now, in this neutral area, we have kind of the middle class or the working class, right? And so those are the folks who they have enough, right? You have enough to live, you have enough to sustain yourself, you're okay. Like you could have more, sure, but you're not at a point where you're needy, right? There's nothing that you necessarily need in this moment. And so this is where those first world countries tend to start, right? The idea of being first world. And so those of us who are on the needier side of the spectrum, right, we're often looked at as kind of a weight on society or a societal economic burden, right? Because what does that need do? That need takes away from this pot. And so if you look at different policies and things, or different backlash from policies, right? The whole thing with the Biden tax plan, for example, right? The push was saying, oh, all these poor people are going to take away from you, right? Middle class and working class, because Biden's going to cost you more in taxes, right? And so that's that classic battleground area. Okay. Let me check the comments to make sure I didn't miss anything. Gender, power, opportunity. Yeah, all of those things are going to come into play. Let me see. And so this idea of the haves and the have-nots plays on two different roles, right? It plays off of hold on. Click the button by accident, of course, right? There it is. Okay. So it's going to play off of things that you need, like resources. But it's also going to play off of wants, right? Things that you desire. And this is where capitalism thrives, right? Capitalism thrives in that it looks heavily at these wants and desires and ignores your resources, right? So commercials, for example, they make you feel like this is something that you need, right? They'll make it feel exclusive, like a club. They'll make it feel like you can't survive without this thing, right? When really it's basic resources that you can't survive without, right? But what capitalism does is it's going to look at these wants and desires and turn those, right? Turn these into ideas of resources, right? Think about who does a really good job at this? McDonald's. Right. And McDonald's kind of throws it in your face a little bit too in the way that they do it. So when they do commercials, right, they'll shoot a commercial, and remember the one that was not too long ago? It was the black mom, and she was saying that she needed to buy her child shoes, right? I think for like a sport or something, but also needed to feed them, right? Well, McDonald's is fast food, and McDonald's as fast food is a want, not a need. Right? Because you could certainly feed your family by going to the store and finding things to cook and bringing that home and spending that time, right? So by turning McDonald's into a resource, right? Now they've made you feel like this is something that you need. Why is this something that you need? Because we're part of your resources, right? You need to buy shoes. Shoes are a resource. So is McDonald's. Right? So think about that when you're watching commercials, because remember that they're also geared towards certain communities, because every community has different wants and needs, right? And every community is coming into that commercial with different resources already available to them. And so turning that thing that they want you to buy into a necessary resource, right? That's how they get you hooked. I know that you can't see the board very well. Again, don't worry about that. I will post a picture of it afterwards. Just wanted to make a note of that. I know this is off topic, but how was your getaway? Forgot to ask in the beginning. It was very nice. I will circle back around and tell you about it at the end. Largely just in case other folks are watching this live after it's done. But thank you for asking. That's so sweet. Okay, now let's talk about wage. I'm gonna do wage in green. Any questions so far as well? Please feel free to ask them. I am looking at the chat box for you. Okay, so what is a wage? What is a wage? What makes a wage different from wealth? What makes a wage different from wealth? What is it? When you think about wages. we have to redistribute land for wealth equality. That's certainly one path, and let's circle back to that idea after we get through the basics. Wage is what your time is worth, your value, right? And so this is literally just a money value, right? This is, are you hourly or are you salary, right? Or are you annual, right? Do you get bonuses? Do you get any other monetary perks, like tips, right? So all of those factors are going to go into this idea of wage. Wage is what you earn for your work, which is based on the ability to make money while you aren't working. The money is working for you. And so that is, what is the term? Y'all always make me blank. You know that? So much thought processing, and sometimes it processes a little too fast for me to get it out. Residual income. So you have an idea of residual income, which is money that is being made without you physically having to make it, right? Versus the idea of having to work, right? That constant labor. And so that's those of us who are, the paycheck to paycheck people. You only get money when that paycheck comes in because you were working, that kind of thing, okay? So residual income is the idea that whatever it is that you've set up is making money for you, whether or not you're actually there. So a good example of that is music, right? Music, books, something that you have developed or something that you've created that is going to constantly bring in streams of money for you. People do the stock markets for this reason, right? Because it's something they can invest in with the hope of it making money back for them. So these are all going to play a role, particularly when we talk about the statistical valuation of a Black life. Okay, so let's go to. Let me skip a little bit. So I want to talk about the idea of contingent valuation. Okay, and contingent valuation is an economics term, and basically it's the idea that there is a good or a service, right, that you are placing value on based off of somebody else's willingness to pay for that thing, right? So willingness to pay. Here's an example. Think about school, right? You have agreed to pay a certain amount of dollars for your semester, right? So if it were to cost you more, would you still pay, right? Would you still be willing to pay for that service? This is where businesses move from offering things like new businesses, for example, right? From offering things like free workshops, free seminars, free samples, right? And they start to learn about what that customer base, what their willingness to pay for that item is, right? And then prices become set. And so it's based off of the willingness to pay as well as the amount of effort that goes into making that thing. So that's why small businesses tend to charge more, right? They have a larger overhead. If it's a thing that they're making by hand, there's more labor that's going into that, right? But all of those things don't matter if you can't get customers, right? And so you can only get and maintain customers based off of whatever they're willing to pay for your product or service. Okay. Wage, you can be fired. Wealth, you have to lose it. That is a great way to put that. Yes. I'm going to add that to the board. Have to lose this. Right? can be fired. I'm going to say usually, right? Because obviously there are contractual differences where you can't always just be fired. And so we have to take that into consideration as well. But for the most part, you're absolutely right, right? That's kind of a key difference here. What a person is willing to pay for goods. I get it. Okay. Isn't brand name also part of contingent valuation? So brand names can be part of contingent valuation because people are more likely to pay or more willing to pay for things that are a bigger brand, right? And so right now, for example, there's this big movement about I changed from a big brand to a black brand, right? And that movement is to talk about that very issue, right? That we're paying for products based off of their name and not necessarily for what they do. Medicine, right? How many people pay for Advil, for example, right? You'll pay what is it, like $16 for 100 capsules or something like that, right? But the store brand one that has the exact same medication in it that is literally named naproxen, right? Which is the active ingredient in Advil, but we don't want to pay for it, right? Because it's half the cost, or you feel like because it's not the name brand there has to be something wrong with it. And so that plays a role too, not only in the way that we as consumers buy things, but also when our businesses start to come up, right? We're already kind of ingrained with that idea of something has to be wrong because this is not a big brand, right? Yeah, I would say name brand is part of it. Target brand is just as effective. Target brand is just as effective. Yes, it is. But we have a distrust of those brands because they're not specific for that thing, right? Like, what else does Advil do? What else are they making, right? And so that's another key area where big brands kind of function better. So let's stick on the Target example. So with Target, right? Target has basically a Target brand of damn near everything, right? There is a Target level brand of almost every product that they sell, right? Well, if we were to go to another supermarket and they were selling Target products, we'd be a little concerned first and foremost, right? So why don't we do the same thing with other big brands? Like Target's a big brand. We don't do the thing with other big brands that are also selling multiple products because they've renamed them, right? Sometimes we don't even know that those products are part of that company. So for example, the COVID vaccines that are supposed to be coming out, right? Well, one of the big brands that's associated with them is Johnson & Johnson. Well, a lot of people didn't know that, right? That was something that was kind of being kept under the rug for a while because of some of the issues that that brand has had in other areas, right? So by not attaching the name of Johnson & Johnson to that vaccine, right, there's a potential for a lot of income in it. But now that potential is kind of squandered a little bit, right? There's a little bit more hesitation because of that connection with Johnson & Johnson. For those who don't know, Johnson & Johnson is also a baby powder company, and they had a lot of lawsuits recently for cancer, for their product causing different cancers. So having that connection, right? Obviously, if someone sees Johnson & Johnson next to this COVID vaccine, they're gonna not look at it so well, right? Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is another great example. We'll bring this back to Target, right? When we go and buy sodas, right, we're less likely to buy Target brand, especially if Coca-Cola happens to be on sale. They could taste the exact same, right? Most people say that they don't taste the exact same, but for the amount of time that you're going to be enjoying it, right, we usually rationalize by saying we're going to pay for the cheaper version of it, especially since it's something that we know is not good for us. But if Coca-Cola is on sale and they're the same price, what are we buying? Well, we're still going to buy the name brand, right? We want to buy the name brand. That's ultimately what we have determined as a resource, right? We've turned that want into a resource, right? Now that we have access to this resource, we're going to take it. Let's look at bags, right? Purses. There's that huge issue with Birkins right now, right? Everybody's talking about Birkin bags. Well, how much do they cost? I don't know how much they cost. You gotta have a membership and all. I don't know. How much does a Birkin bag cost? It's not something I want, so I don't know how much it costs, right? I'm sure it costs more than a Target bag, though. I'm positive that it costs more than a Target bag, right? You don't need a membership to Target in order to purchase a Target bag, right? Yeah, huh? Anyway, um, so if you have access to that Birkin bag, right? More than likely, you're going to go for that Birkin bag, right? If that's a thing that you want, right? If that is a want that you are turning into a resource. If you just need a bag, Target will do, right? But you'd still rather go to Target than the thrift store. See where we're going with this? So we also place valuations on things, right? Okay. It's funny talking about meds. And it always goes with generic meds because they're cheaper, right? And they're just as effective. They know how to cut their cost, right? Wasn't Johnson also part of white heroin abuse? Whites, they weren't sued for facilitating the drug use for them, and they were sued and had to pay to rebuild the damage. I am not sure about that. I would not be surprised though, since Johnson & Johnson, the baby powder has been used to cut drugs, right? That's been something that has surfaced a lot in litigations, but to their involvement, I'm not aware. Okay. So now let's talk about the value of a statistical life. Okay. Value of a statistical life. Okay. What do you think goes into this value? How do we say what your life is worth, right? That's really the question that's being asked here. What is your life statistically worth? Now, this is a real economics calculation, okay? This is a real economics calculation. Who uses this calculation? Insurance companies, right? Medical insurance, auto insurance companies, disability, right? Uses this calculation. Regular Social Security, right? Some retirement companies will use this calculation. So this is a real calculation that gets used. However, crack is the same for blacks. We got harsh sentences instead of programs, and we can't sue the government for community repair. That the white privilege there. Yeah. And I don't know that it's that we can't sue the government. It's mostly that we get shut down faster. If we were to come up with a legitimate case, or a case that could not be refuted, right? A case that had solid legal standing, I think that it would be highly possible. We just haven't done that. Okay, so what is this valuation? Well, this valuation is essentially your market value. So market value of a person. Well, what would calculate that market value? So it's your total potential earnings. Total potential earnings is equal to your wage, right, in hours, over your lifespan salary. Okay? And your lifespan salary is how much you are anticipated to make in a singular lifetime, right? Based off of the the average lifespan of that time, right? And your current wage. So what that wage would look like if it were your lifespan's wage. Okay. I'm looking at it on Google, and it says how much society is willing to pay to reduce the risk of death. Essentially the same thing, right? So, because we want you to live to work, right? We want you to live to work. However, we're also going to maintain a specific hourly wage for you. What was the thing? Hold on. I think I missed 2 comments here. Financial value society or companies place on people. Yes. We got 2 things to work on: treaties and now putting together a class action suit for crack introduction into the Black community. I'm with it. Look at us just over here making actions, right? Making plans to put into action. It's gonna be great. Okay. So you as a person right now, right? You as a person right now, think about this. Your total potential earnings, right? Well, what is our current lifespan expectancy, right? So you're gonna calculate your lifespan expectancy, right, from right now in this age. So that would be, what is our current lifespan? That's a good question. Black lifespan. All right, so the average for Black men right now is 69.1 years. So you're going to do 69.1 minus whatever your current age is if you're a Black male, right? Right? Times your current salary, whatever you make right now per hour. And that's your lifespan salary. Okay? So you're going to divide your hourly wage by that lifespan salary. And that's how much your total potential earnings are. Right? Well, for those of us who aren't making a whole lot of money, that's probably not a large number. Right? That's not going to be a large number at all. Because remember here too, right? For most of Black and brown folks, we don't have things like assets and possessions and all those things that are going to add to this lifespan salary, right? This is your net worth, how much you are worth as a person, right? So this number is going to be really low for us. Okay. Let me get back to where I was. Okay, so let's look at labor market value. So in the labor market, right? In the labor market, we know that certain jobs come with certain risk, right? And so that risk of death, right? We're going to go back to that idea of risk of death. So risk of death usually increases how much that labor is worth, right? Increases labor worth. Okay, so an increased risk of death means that there's an increase in the labor's worth. And so if you look at jobs like people who wash windows on those skyscrapers, right? They make a lot of money. There's a lot of risk of death, right? One of those things falls. Are you kidding me? You're done for. You know what I'm saying? So think about Blue Lives Matter, right? Arguably, Blue Lives Matter is birthed from this idea, right? When we talk or when we see news broadcasts, right, especially pro-police news broadcasts, what is the one thing that they always say? Officers are putting their lives on the line, right? It's a reminder they're putting their lives on the line, right? So not only are they putting their lives on the line, right, that increased risk of death, not only should we not defund them, we should be paying them more, right? Especially for cops that are working in inner cities, right? Because that inner city is also by itself an increased risk of death. Why? Because of racism, because of the ideas that people have instilled about Black folks, right? Because of those stereotypes, those things that we have talked about ad nauseum to this point. Could COVID-19 pay raises be part of that. I haven't seen any increase on my check. What do you mean by that? Could COVID-19 pay raises be part of that? I haven't seen an increase in my check. Are you talking about hazard pay? Because hazard pay would definitely fall under this, right? Hazard pay is that idea of there's an increased risk of death, right? Especially with COVID-19, and the only thing that anybody ever talks about on the news is the death rates, even though the survival rates are way bigger. But, you know, one of my pet peeves with it. But there is, of course, an increased risk of death because any sort of illness or injury is going to give you at least a little bit of this, right? And so the hazard pay that folks were offering was along this idea. Okay. Yeah. So that does fall under that, right? And so anybody who has not received hazard pay, right? Well, what does that say about you, right? Well, going back to this idea, right? That plays into the statistical valuation of your life. You're not necessarily worth hazard pay, right? If your life is already not expected to hold much value, right? Or if your death is actually less risky for that business, right? And so what kind of business is that? Well, think about like tenured positions, right? For tenured track folks, for people who are, have job security within the realm of teaching, most of those folks don't leave that position until they've died, right? Or until they're at retirement age, right? And they stay in that position. That makes it also harder for other folks to have access to that position, right? So if you know that it's difficult to get one of those positions, you're not leaving that spot until you have to, right? Because you know the likelihood of you getting it back is slim to none. So you dying, right, as a tenure track person is likely riskier for the business, right? Us dying as adjunct faculty is not very risky, right? They replace us quick as day, right? In and out. It's like, whatever. Move on to the next one. We might get an email about how sad they are. That's about it, right? Think about that at your jobs, right? If you were to pass away today, does that increase risk at your job at all, right? Does that increase any financial burden on your job? Does your position have high turnover rates anyway, right? How fast will they put up the ad for your position, right? So think about all of those types of things. These are all going to play a role. We were talking about, we were talking about Blue Lives Matter. We talked enough about them, I suppose. They put up help when it's signed the second after. That's difference with wealth and wage also. Yes, so that is a difference between wealth and wage as well, right? Again, going back to the ideas that you put out there, right? Wealth you have to actually lose, right? So tenure track position, you have to lose that position, right? That's job security. You don't get fired. You have to lose it. Whereas us, we can be fired. Then it's whatever, right? So here's you know what? Let's segue to this because I'm supposed to tell you all about this anyway. Those PTEs, right? Those evaluations that y'all do about your teachers, those really only matter for us, right? That matters for the folks who don't have job security. So you have the power to either tell a department why they should or shouldn't keep on adjunct faculty. Those same evaluations that you do for tenure track people, they don't matter as much. Like they have job security. What is your evaluation gonna do? They're not gonna get fired. They might not even be read. Why? Because they don't need to be evaluated for that purpose, right? They're not there in the same capacity as those of us who are part-time, right? Non-tenure track, all of those types of folks. So do those evaluations because they matter for people like me, okay? And please be nice to me, I hope, because I have been I think I've been nice to you. Okay. There's a good point. Let's talk about stereotypes in terms of this labor market value. What is the role of stereotypes? What's the role of stereotypes? And let me bring back this just to refresh your memory and give you something to think about here, right? So we've got this race wars that goes on here, right? Where obviously the bottom is going to be where the needy is, right? We're looking at it from this perspective now, right? So the bottom is going to be the needy, and the top is going to be the plentiful, right? It's amazing how many different things this singular triangle can fit, right? Okay, so what role do stereotypes play in this labor market value? Well, let's think about gender stereotypes. We know that there is a wage gap between female-bodied people and male-bodied people, right? Between men and women. We know that. Well, why is that? Because of the stereotypes placed on women, right? They're emotional. They can't make, executive decisions, and the menstrual issues, and they're going to be out of work because they're going to be bearing children, right? They're going to be out of work for several months at a time, and we have things to do, right? Well, all of those stereotypes have played a role in how women are valued in the labor market. And so that also predetermines the types of jobs we're more likely to get. Would it be like having tattoos, wearing natural hair? Yes, all of those things. All of those things play a role, right? So let's think about this in terms of race. What are some racialized stereotypes that are going to impact our value in the labor market? Well, what kind of hair do you have, right? The Supreme Court, it might have been the Ninth Circuit, they had put a ruling out a couple of years ago that says that if you have locks, you can legally be barred from employment, right? Because it's considered to be less valuable, right? People who wear locks tend to have other stereotypes associated with them, right? Oh, all they do is smoke a lot of weed. They're late and lazy, and they don't have a good work ethic, and they're unprofessional, right? All those stereotypes are playing into what jobs you can now get in that labor market. I think I saw a comment pop up. No, I didn't. Okay. Stereotypes can shift, right? And they're going to shift with the social time. So 10 years ago, right, tattoos used to be a huge issue. I mean, there's still a lot of remnants of it, but there's way less than there used to be. And part of that actually has to do with the push for small businesses, right? People who are starting their own businesses are also able to create the rules and the guidelines for how they want their business run, right? Including how they can show up to that business. So tattoos is something that we're seeing a huge cultural shift in. But historically speaking, right, if somebody had tattoos, they were considered, overly aggressive and, non-diplomatic, and they make rash decisions that last a long time, right? Those are kind of the ideas that would go along with that. And so who was likely to have tattoos, right? Well, prison tats have been a thing for a long time, right? There's cultural tattoos like Samoans, right? They have their very traditional tattoos. And for anybody who is an outsider looking in, that can look threatening. It can look scary, right? It can look tribal. Well, what is tribal? Tribal is non-white, right? And so to look as close to white as possible, that also meant to be as dignified as possible. On the flip side, there's also the religious piece that goes along with that. So we've talked extensively about the United States being a Christian-run country. And so within the realm of Christianity is also anti-tattoo sentiment. Well, as we're seeing a decrease in Christianity being as prevalent, right, we're also seeing an increase in business owners and the workforce having tattoos, right? And so we can also see like a lot of these different types of correlations happen. If that's the case, Trump back must be blasted the way he is operating the past 4 years. I don't want to think. Y'all funny. Okay. Consumer preference. Let's go to consumer preference. And I'm just kind of throwing these key terms up here now. I'll stick with the blue. Consumer preference. Well, what is a preference? What is a preference? And is a preference the same as a bias? Is having a preference the same thing as having a bias? What is that to you when you hear preference? What do you think? And just to re-note, right, I don't have an answer to that question. It's just a question for thought. As y'all know by now, I do that a lot. I like to throw ideas out there that I have not fully thought through. So is having a preference the same thing as having a bias? What do you think? Let me rephrase this question, give you something interesting to think about. I heard an argument that intentionally shopping at Black-owned businesses is racist, right? Intentionally shopping at Black-owned businesses and intentionally not shopping at white-owned businesses, right, is racist. Are the same thing. Is that racist? Is it racist to only or to intentionally shop at Black-owned businesses, right, and intentionally not shop at white-owned businesses? What do you think? I don't know. So what is a consumer preference then, right? A consumer preference is kind of straightforward, right? It's what does the consumer want, right? And so a lot of this idea is based off of actual decisions, right? And so decisions are key because what markets are doing is they're looking at what we're buying, right? What we're buying into, changes in the market, changes in ideas, changes in needs, changes in patterns, right? And then acting accordingly. So let's think about this in terms of music, right? Since I teach the hip hop class, one of the primary discussions that we have throughout the semester is what would happen if we stopped using the N-word in music, right? If we stopped using the N-word in hip hop. Well, that would be a considerable shift in the market, right? But then the music sales would probably fall off. Why? Because of consumer preference. Because we constantly make the decision to buy into music that has the N-word in it, right? We constantly make that decision. Well, who else is constantly making this decision? The money that's fueling the market. Well, that's not us, right? Who is the primary consumer of hip hop? White middle class women. Why white middle class women? Because they're buying it for their kids, because they're feeding into that same stereotype of, often being the homemaker and being the person who's raising the kids and, spending the time with them. So what are they buying for their kids? The things that they like, the music, concert tickets, t-shirts, right? All of those different things. Their money is what's fueling that market. So until they decide to stop purchasing it, right, well, that market's not going to shift. The market's going to stay the same. That means all those valuations are going to stay the same. Let's continue on this line, right? So if we were to stop buying into music that we believe, if we were to ask our artists, right, let me switch this because I don't want it to sound weird, right? If we were to petition to our artists to specifically and intentionally make more empowering music, right? To stop using the N word, for example, right? And this is just from my particular take. Would they continue to be successful? Where they are, sure, but within the community, probably not. Does the community matter that much? Well, if the community doesn't have any money to put into their continued art, probably not, right? Because our willingness to pay is not as high as other people's, right? Well, what does that also then impact? That also then impacts the total potential earnings of that person, right? And not our money. Remember, the people whose money who's fueling that art or that continuation of art in that way, right? So I posed this question to my 205 students. If white middle class women are the primary consumers of hip hop only because they're buying it for their kids, right? Why are there not more white rappers? Well, can you imagine white rappers in this same context, right? In that same hip hop context, talking about white people the way that we talk about ourselves, or that our male-bodied people talk about female-bodied people, right? Could you imagine that switch up? Probably not. If we could imagine it, it would be in every other genre of music in the same way that it's prevalent in hip hop, right? That's why we don't see that switch up. Their willingness to pay is racialized at that point, right? They're willing to pay for black folks to degrade themselves, right? They're not willing to pay for white folks degrading white folks, right? Does that make sense? Oh, I like Dick Gregory. What did he say? It depends on, is it maliciously done? Go back to that comment and clarify for me what you mean. Dick Gregory said, when the decision to stop saying the N-word, we wasn't in the room, just like there wasn't any mentally disabled people in the room when saying retard was wrong. Hold on, let me make sure I read that right. Dick Gregory said that when the decision to stop saying the N-word, we wasn't in the room. Are you saying when he said that the decision to make that was on the table, we weren't in the room? Just like there wasn't any mentally disabled people in the room when saying retarded was wrong. Clarify that statement for me, because I'm not sure what that's referring to, but it sounds like something that he might say. I'm just not exactly clear on the full context. So let me give you a basic idea for where this consumer preference comes in. Okay, so if you think about your insurance companies, right? Your insurance companies are setting their rates a lot of the time based off of different decisions that folks make. So the general area that you live in, for example, right? There might be a tendency for more accidents, or there might be a tendency for more car break-ins. Those are going to play a role in how much you pay for insurance, as well as the color of your car, right? That's a decision. The type of car that you have, right? That's a decision. If you get speeding tickets often, right? Or if you don't pay your insurance regularly, or if you didn't have insurance for a long time, right? As well as some things that are like not even directly related to driving, right? So let me actually take that to health insurance, because this is a better example. So health insurance, we usually think about going to the doctor, right? Do you go to the doctor? How often do you go? Medications that you might get, right? Well, there are other areas of health and safety that are covered under your health insurance that people don't always know about. So if you ride bicycles, right? Some insurance companies will cover the cost of a bike helmet. So you can buy a bike helmet and then have that reimbursed through your insurance. That is often something that will bring your insurance rates down, because it's considered a healthy decision, right? The same way that smokers versus non-smokers are given different rates, right? So our collective decisions are often what inform consumer preference for brands, for industries, for institutions, right? If you think about Dominguez, right? Dominguez makes decisions based off of um, how our student population functions. So if because we have a lot of people who live in housing, for example, right? Well, one of the plans they've been making is to redo housing, right? We have more and more of a need for housing. So what do we need to do? We need to address that, right? Um, they haven't done it yet, obviously, but it's certainly in the works. Um, we identified a need for more impact in the sciences. And so what did they do? Well, they worked on this grant and got a grant for the new STEM building. They built the STEM building. They hired people specifically to work in those classes, right? And so what is that based off? Well, that's based off of students coming in and wanting to take more of those classes, right? The orgs that you have on campus, right? Those are all consumer preference. Those are all campus decisions based off of what students want. Having the Black Resource Center. The Black Resource Center was created on the backs of Black students pushing for one, right? So you have a lot of influence in your everyday consumer preferences. So long as you know that you have that, and so long as you actively use it, right? So we can say the same thing about voting, right? Voting is technically a consumer preference. It's based off of decisions that we make in our day-to-day lives. Those are the things that we're voting for, right? So when you hear people say that they were voting for Trump because of economic issues or because he speaks his mind, right? Well, those are things that they want to do in their daily lives or things that they're doing in their daily lives, right? And so the decision to vote for Trump is also based off of their everyday lived experiences, their preferences associated with the decisions that they make. For us too, right? The idea of settling, right? It wasn't even an idea of voting for Biden and Harris, right? It was the idea of settling, right? Settle for Biden and Harris. Like, yeah, we know that everybody up there is not or does not have the best pass, right? Doesn't have the most pro-black, pro-supportive, like Black Lives Matter type of ideology, right? They never functioned in that way. So our decision to support those candidates, right, came from our preferences and our everyday lived experience decisions. We know we don't want to vote for worse, so we're going to vote for what we think is less than worse, right? Or is a little bit better than worse, right? Okay, so let's go back to these questions here that I had posted for you in the beginning. And so these are things that you can think about while you are constructing your ideas and adding on to the dialogue from last week, right? I'm going to skip a little bit of them. So what is wealth inequality? What's the difference between this and wage gaps, right? And as we identified, wage gaps are something that definitely impacts people based off of both gender and race. So that's something really easy to bring into the questions, right? Or into the dialogues. What is the role of wealth accumulation in creating ghettos? So if we think about the construct of a ghetto, right? Well, first and foremost, we didn't create those, right? They were created as a visual form of the wealth gap. So having things like redlining, right, where people of color were only allowed to rent or purchase land in specific areas, right? That's how we have this creation of the ghetto, right? It's literally a lack of distribution of wealth. It's a lack of distribution of resources, right? And so that is going to play a key role in what we have available to us, right? That's why the schools look the way that they do. That's why our institutions look the way that they do, right? Because of that that lack of resource distribution. Is whiteness a possession or a resource? And if so, does that justify the white gaze as a method of decreasing wealth inequality? So what is the white gaze? Right? Well, G-A-Z-E, right? So the white gaze is this idea of looking through a lens of whiteness, right? how does whiteness see the world, right? As a system, right? So whiteness as a system, not whiteness as a color. So whiteness as a system is going to look at the world through this type of lens, right? And so then is whiteness, because remember this triangle is functioning for multiple purposes. We've used it for race, we've used it for gender, and now we've used it for wealth, so they can overlap, right? So is whiteness a commodity? Is whiteness a resource, right? The cost of a black life. So we can look at this valuation. Etc. Right? And so those are kind of like basic ideas for where you can start adding to the dialogue and kind of creating a new wave of thought. So for this week, it's a little bit different in that weeks 11, 12, and 13 don't necessarily run together. So I know that the task is a little bit less clear than it has been in previous weeks, but I'm interested to kind of see how it develops, since obviously things are very interconnected. I want to bring up Killer Mike, right? So Killer Mike did a documentary last year, I think it was, talking about buying from black-owned businesses. And so one of the things that he found out, or that he noticed throughout this documentary, is that it's difficult to fully live on black-owned businesses alone. So he would go to restaurants, right? He would go to black-owned restaurants, but then he wouldn't eat anything because the food that they purchased was not from a black-owned business. And so if we look at this, this kind of like cyclical occurrence, right? So we can look at the business itself, right? We look at the business itself. We can look at the suppliers, right, for that business. We can look at the movers for that business. So for example, the people who are doing like Postmates and DoorDash, right? Well, those would be movers of that business, right? So you can look at consumers, right? The customers of that business, right? Who is going there? And then you can look at the profits, right? Because not only profits in terms of how much that business is bringing in, but also where that money is then going after. You know, is this money going back into the community or not? Majority of the time, it's not coming back into our businesses. So what's happening when we get to profit, that circle is breaking, right? That circle is breaking because where's the next black-owned business that you're getting something from, right? Where is it? Where are you getting things from? Or where is this money going to afterwards, right? So let's say you got a profit off of this business, and one of the things that you're going to do with your profit is buy yourself some lunch. Well, where are you buying this lunch at? Are you putting it back into the community and buying from another black-owned business? Is there somebody nearby you can even do that to, right? Or do that with? So that's why, that's how that break is happening. So this break is also happening here when we get the suppliers, right? That break is happening again when we get to suppliers. You have the black-owned business, right? But who's supplying that business? Does that make sense? We have another break going on right here with the movers, right? So, yeah, it's right here. I don't need it. Here you go. So you've got the black-owned business, right? Maybe you found yourself some black suppliers. Cool. Who's moving the product for you, right? How many black-owned moving companies do we have, or movers do we have? So there's one rising company that I'm aware of for food industry and specifically, right? They're called Black and Mobile, and they only deliver food from black-owned businesses, right? Well, even they're a great example of this. Let's find another break here. The consumers. So you can have a black-owned business, right? You can find yourself black suppliers. You can find yourself black movers. Who's buying it? Who is the actual consumer, right? Well, that's not necessarily black folks either, right? What do you think? Is there a break in the profits? Is there a break from consumers to profits? There could be. Let's stick with the restaurant industry. I think the restaurant industry will give us a good example of this, right? Who do you tend to tip? Well, if you work in the restaurant industry, who you tend to tip is also going to impact that individual profit, right? So we're looking again at a wage gap. You okay?
Listen.
Oh yeah. Okay. Learning. Okay. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions about this? So what Killer Mike was getting at was that we need to address all of these different things, right? Because we can have the black-owned business, but if we're not getting supplies from another black-owned business, right, we're already creating a rift, right? We need to find ways to close this gap. And that is how we start to increase wealth within the community, right? By addressing all of these different areas of concern so that we can do what other communities have done, and that's recirculate money within that community. So Asian communities, right, the pockets of Asian communities that we see, like Koreatown, right, Little Tokyo. Well, one of the reasons they're so successful is that they've addressed all of these different needs, right? They've closed a lot of these gaps. And so in closing these gaps, they circulate money within their own communities, right? So you'll see the person who owns the laundromat is going right across the way for lunch to, you know, the other Asian person's restaurant, right? When they're done at that restaurant, where are they going? They're going to the SunTrust Bank, right? They're going within their own community, right? You see like they don't do it so much anymore, but they used to have like the Chinese food restaurants that would deliver on bikes, right? So they're keeping their own movers, right? Or they would kind of force you to come pick it up too, right? Because they want you to pay in person, because there's like a distrust of other communities too, right? Neither here nor there. Anyway, so by addressing these, right, this is how we're going to create generational wealth. This is how we're going to fully close that gap. But we can't close that gap while we have all of these gaping holes in it, right, in this circle. Okay. He said blacks are not the catalyst for saying nigga was wrong. Whites decided that because we took the power out of the word. So that's actually a premise that I disagree with, because that word was never ours to begin with for it to have power. And so white folks are actually the deciding force for its continuation, if you think about it. Who owns these industries? Like, well, I'll go back to the music industry example, right? Anything that happens within that industry, right, is at the discretion of the label. So the label has to approve the use of any terms or any visuals, like all those different things, right? The label has to approve those things. So for independent artistry, obviously, it's a little different. But if we're talking about mainstream, right, we're thinking about labels and industries. So if the N-word is so acceptable then, right, or if white folks are the ones who are saying that it's inappropriate for us to use, well, first and foremost, why did they give it to us, right? This is an evolved term, right? This is an evolved term from colonization. And then why don't other rappers use it? Like, there's a couple of famous white rappers, right? When do they ever use it, like, especially regularly, right? We don't see that. And then for other industries, right, for other music industries, so let's do a comparison with country music, right? There are black country music singers. Why aren't they using the N-word? Well, that has to deal with the country music industry, right? that has to deal with what they value, and they don't value blackness first and foremost, right? But also um, maintaining the idea of white supremacy in that um, in that music genre requires a certain set of language, like a certain language um, pool, if you will, right? And the N word is not in that pool, right? So is it acceptable or is it not acceptable to use then, right? That would be the question that you would beg if those were the folks who are actually making that decision. We as the consumers and we as the folks who are continuously perpetuating that idea within our communities are probably more to blame for its continuation. Um, and again, that's just my perspective from my own personal research and from teaching the AFS 205 Intro to Hip Hop course. So again, like, you're more than welcome to disagree. As far as malicious, the malicious comments are your preferences. Oh, about preferences. Yeah, so you can definitely tell when there's some malicious intent behind having a preference or not. But like, for example, right, like if you prefer marbled cheese to cheddar, right, there's probably not a lot of malicious intent in there, right? But when you start to add stipulations, right? I don't like marbled cheese because it's made in factories that hire undocumented immigrants, right? Well, then your intentions, right, become malicious. So I think that's what you're getting at there, and I definitely agree with that. Intent matters. They say money's supposed to bounce at least 8 times in your community, but blacks don't do it. Once it says that black dollar is only in the community for about 9 minutes, and at least all races money bounce. Like Latino 6 times at low end, Jewish at high end 13 times. Right, and for that same reason, right? Because there are more gaps that are being addressed here in those other pockets of communities than what we do. I think 9 minutes is about what I've seen too in the research, that dollars only stay in the black community for about 9 minutes. And again, that's where is it going, right? Once you have it, where is it going, right? So once we give our money to a black business, where is that money going? Well, they have to support their overhead. So look at who is their supplier, who is their mover, right? When they're getting their profits, where are they spending their money at themselves, right? So all those different gaps matter in how we can address the wealth gap and the wealth issues within the black community, in my perspective. Okay, so we've covered a lot of very like technical information in terms of what wealth is and how to think about it. But again, for what you've seen from me so far this semester, I think that you can understand the value that we have placed on kind of breaking down those terms and breaking down those ideas that seem simplistic, or that seem like they should be more simplistic than they actually are. So we can continue this conversation next week if there's something of interest to you that comes up. So I know that we're doing this week a little bit earlier than I had intended to. So if you haven't done week 13 readings yet, that's fine. We're going to have a continuation of it. We can have a continuation of it next week. Next week we also have our guest speaker. So our guest speaker is going to talk a lot about the terms Hispanic and Latino. And I thought that was important because of all the intersectional dialogues that we've had, so that you can have a better idea of what those terms actually mean and how they play a role in our experiences here. So like, for example, we've talked about the terms minority and majority. Well, if we exclude people who should be in the Africana community from the idea of being black, right, based off of the idea of being Latino or Hispanic, even though those are colonial terms, we're probably cutting off some of our own power source just based off of not including people who should be identified as black, right? So we're going to talk about that extensively next week. Hold on, I see another comment here. But psychologically speaking, the white is better. The white is better comes so we will drive to another community. Right, yeah. So again, right, that valuation that we put on resources, right? Where those resources are coming from. The needy versus the plentiful. Well, we know our communities probably don't have it, so we're going to go over there, right? And if it's plentiful, we feel like it's better quality. As well as like what quality looks like, right? The quality assurance, for example, right? We have this idea that there are certain things that have better quality, and sometimes they absolutely do, right? A Coach purse is going to last longer than a Target purse is going to last, right? So that question of quality is another good space to think about these ideas along. Feeling it's a better product or money well spent. Yep. Yep. Yeah, you get the idea. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and end here. Oh, you had asked about my trip. It was very nice. We went to a cabin in Big Bear. So I'm glad that I pushed our time back. So we actually had a power outage and everything. So that was interesting. But it was cool. You know, it snowed, so it looked like Jersey in the winter time. And yeah, it was real nice. It was real nice. All right. So we will talk again next week. I hope you all mind your self-care. I know things have not been as crazy as we anticipated in the first couple of days, but you know, there's certainly still time for things to escalate. So please continue to be vigilant and look out for each other. If you have questions, again, you can always comment them underneath. I will make sure to post this board for you underneath of the video. Do we have grade updates? Grade updates on what? You should have gotten a message about the CRP number 2, and I don't think that you have anything else due. I left the Q&A up for the final project since we did make changes to that, as y'all saw in the group chat. So I'm going to keep that Q&A up to make sure that everyone's on the same page. Where is that information, or is it based on participation in the class? Oh, yeah, it's based on your participation. Like, if you've been doing the things you're supposed to do, you're getting your full credit, right? So for me, like, that's why I don't feel a need to do grade checks for like your posts and responses. It's literally like, did you put in effort, right? Were you participating? If you participated, you're going to get your full credit. I don't split hairs with that. Okay. Any other questions that you have? Like, it should really be a free 30 points every week, right? Just for having your initial post and the 2 peer responses, or like weeks like this week, right? Just having 3 peer responses. It really should be that simple. Okay, so I'm gonna leave the Q&A up, so that way if you do have any other questions specifically about the class or about anything that is or is not necessarily coming up anymore, right? Like the final project, I gave y'all a break on that. And the CRPs, there's only a couple of you that have to submit the next one, so that shouldn't really be a huge thing. Oh, thank you. Yes. This is actually from a Black-owned business too, at that. So that's amazing. These are also from a Black-owned business. Y'all don't know this, but I try to actually support Black-owned businesses in every live that I do. Every time I do like a performance, anything, I try to wear something that is from a Black-owned business at minimum. So there's a fun fact. All right, let's get out of here. I feel like I'm chatting way too much. And I want to make sure that folks can access this video. So have a great rest of your day, and I will see y'all next week.